And we're going to open it up for a few kind of final questions and a little bit of maybe a little more back and forth between the panelists. There's a couple things that have come up in some of the questions, as well as in some of the commentary that's been shared. I think often that there is a perspective that increasing local production relates directly into decreasing local food insecurity. And so I'm curious, the perspective of your organizations and your thinking about how the policies that you see on the docket for this session can help thread the needle between supporting our agricultural community, but supporting communities to access food critical to their sustenance and happiness. Anybody go ahead.
I can take a quick first stab, Hunter. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say, that's why I'm a big fan of approaches that channel funding through the consumer. So those kind of nutrition programs I outlined, you know, whether it's a meal program or a public benefits program, they're getting directly to the people that are residents of this state. And those people are then, you know, required to spend those monies on local food. But there are no, I think, otherwise, I mean, there may be other solutions as well. I'd love to hear from other panelists, but that's a one way to ensure that, you know, you are making sure that that production increase is going to local people.
That's great. Thank you, Danny. I mean, I think definitely a tried and true approach in humanitarian assistance settings globally is give people money, they will spend it on what they need. And I think it's been important to see how, at least federally, we've adopted some of that approach as a part of this pandemic. And I'm hoping that in the future, we'll see more of those opportunities for people to make the decisions on their own about what their critical needs are. Does anybody else have a additional thought on that, or shall I forward us along to some of the other questions that have come up in the chat here?
Hunter, I would just echo Daniela's point. You know, when when we were talking about what our priorities are, the SNAP and Double Up Bucks program is one of the top priorities. And it's for this very reason, that it's solving for multiple problems at once. And so it's got this multiplier effect that we would really encourage any of our public policy. You know, if we look at how do we solve for multiple problems concurrently, then we're just going to get a lot more mileage. So in that way, we get to both address food insecurity issues, as well as our food production issues and our food sovereignty issues. So as we've talked about over the course of the day today, this is a really complex issue, and there are lots of different agendas and or priorities. And when we get to find the points of convergence and the points of congruence, it's particularly powerful.
Great.
Can I just add really quickly? I wanted to say that I'm a huge fan of planning. And I think that this pandemic has begun to give us some insight into what we're actually producing. So that because we had to gather data on how the CARES Act money was being spent on food, then we are starting to have a sense of what we're producing, where we're producing, how much we're producing. And prior to this, I really felt like we were operating in the dark. And I think that we have had legislation in the past, and we do have, you know, some language around planning, but I think that it needs to be much more explicit, and we need to do better at gathering data so that we know what our constraints are, and then how to address those constraints and how to work in a more systemic fashion and really integrate all of the elements of our food policy. Because right now, we don't even have the basic knowledge we need to do the integrated work. So I think we need to really look at that data that came from this past experience and build on it, and to pull it together and really gather it and use it.
As a daily data wrangler, I can't help but be heartened by this statement. And certainly the loss of our Hawaii Agricultural Statistical Service, you know, now somewhat of a decade ago, and there's beginning to have our market news system come back into place. I think the information is really critical for key decision making. One other item that came up in a couple different ways in the chat was discussion about the relationship between exports and land use, and thinking about how we utilize state subsidies in the forms of land, in the forms of other types of programming, and the extent to which we should be supporting export agriculture versus agriculture for consumption. And I
Hi,
think
just to jump in, Hunter, that's a great question, and you're doing an awesome job of moving us along. I want to note that it is 1:30, and so some folks have hard stops and need to go, but this is a wonderful discussion. The kind of back channel conversation among the organizers is, if it's all right, Hunter, can we go till 1:40 to continue this conversation? And if panelists have a hard stop and need to leave, they certainly can, but if you're able to stay for 10 more minutes with us, we'd appreciate it. And for all the attendees listening, we are going to try to save the Q&A and get recordings of this out to everyone who registered. You can also email food@purplemaya.org. That's PURPLEMAIA.org. And that's how you can contact the event organizers about any questions, or if there's somebody that you want to get in contact with. I know that we weren't able to have a lot of, limitations of Zoom, have communication in all directions, but we're happy to try to facilitate connections after this. So with that announcement, I'll hand it back to Hunter, who was just asking a great question. Can you restate what that was?
Sure. Big questions with very short answers, of course. So one of the things that came up in the chat a couple of times was the relationship between production for local consumption and production for export, and the way that our state essentially subsidizes certain types of agricultural activities through who they choose to allocate lands to, through who their programs support. And this could be a variety of different programs, from tax incentives to whatever else. I think one key piece that came up, though, in one of the questions statements, we could say, was about our capacity for when we're exporting goods, that in the times of crisis, one thing that at least I found in my research is that the quantity that we export becomes the quotient that we're able to reapportion to our local consumption. And so I'm curious how you all and your organizations are working to understand and navigate the relationship between export production and production for local consumption.
In my new role, I've changed. I used to think, what the heck are we doing exporting food when we can't be self-sufficient here? But I've rethought this, that for a good business plan, you've got to diversify your income a little bit, number one. Number two, if my goal is to be able to have food security for everyone and have local food available and cost effective for everyone, that we may need to actually leverage the Hawaii branding that's overseas and sell the same product that we can for a much less price to our residents than we would as export, to hopefully offset your bottom line. Because while not all products are more expensive when it's grown or raised locally, some products are. And so let's figure out a way to make things a little cheaper for us, while banking on the branding that Hawaii has become.
Products from paradise certainly have a currency worldwide.
Wait, I'm going to trademark that, Hunter.
Does anyone else have a read on thinking about this navigation of the types of markets that we're supporting through various subsidies and activities at the state level?
I mean, I hate to jump in on every question, but on this question I will, because I think that our continued dependence on a globalist approach makes us vulnerable in times of crisis. And I think that vulnerability became really evident in this pandemic, but it will also become evident in cases of natural disaster like a hurricane. And I understand the argument, because we have that conversation at the legislature annually. But I think I land in a place that is more about thinking about how, if the desire is to diversify a farmer's portfolio, then to think about how we can leverage investments in food hubs and food processing so that they can sell different versions of their crop to the local market. And to really focus on how we can be consuming the foods that we grow here, and to really be thinking about the wisest, highest use of our lands, and is it for, and our public monies, and is it to be I mean, I appreciate that farmers need to make a profit and need to make a living. But I think that there are ways to do that that also contribute to the common good here. And I think we need to find that balance. And right now, I think that we are really out of balance.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of thinking, optimizing, planning, and advocacy in the weeks, months, years ahead. So in closing, I'd love to hear from each of you in a 30-second snippet. Just what is it that you are most excited, most fired up about for the coming session? The action you're going to take, the bill you're going to push, the network you're going to build or be a part of. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Claire.
I guess I would say I'm most excited about the currency that this topic has gained over the past 6 months, 8 months, whatever our time frame is now. And there are many of us who've been operating in this space for a very long time. And sometimes we have to resist the urge to say, welcome to the party, we've been hanging out for a while. But for us to say, really, welcome to the party. Like, this is such an important conversation for us to be having. And the growing interest and awareness and engagement with food security, with food sovereignty, with food self-sufficiency, whatever our version is, can only be good for us. So I'm very excited to be in such good company and to have the party growing.
That's wonderful. And it is a party. There are over 100 people that are still here. Thank you all for so much for making the time today. Dexter, what's your bright spot going forward?
The way that government is working together, I'm pretty impressed, and that more and more of our counties are actually listening to our communities and not making this top-down governmental decision, but actually trying to leverage resources to support our communities and community groups that really know their communities instead of just trying to do it. So I'm really excited about the change in mindset that's happening, maybe spurred on by the pandemic.
It certainly has got more conversations going, that's for sure. Daniela?
Excited. We have made, this pandemic has obviously been terrible in so many ways, but it's really changed the conversation. It's really just brought to light all of these supply chain issues, like the fragility of so many people living on a fixed income. And I think what I'm most excited about is seeing the connections that have been made between local farmers and these emergency food organizations that were not talking to each other before. These emergency food organizations relied on donations from grocery stores, philanthropic funds. They were purchasing whatever canned foods were cheapest or being donated or expired. And now, Maui Food Bank went from purchasing from 2 local farmers to 26 or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but I'm excited about those connections. And I think that, regardless of what policies we can pass, those relationships that have been built are going to really serve us well going forward in building that food system.
Yes, indeed. Many great new connections. Micah, what's got you fired up?
I would just like to say ditto to what everyone else just said. Just kidding. Very good points, everyone. I think just building upon what Dexter had said around the connection between government and the community and the key role that plays within the agricultural sector. We got to continue to connect with lawmakers, with the administration, federal, state, county levels as much as possible. Again, we can't rely on the legislature to solve all of our problems, but rather we got to seek out every opportunity that exists out there. We're going to be in a tough spot moving forward, but there's a lot of momentum that we can keep from 2020 and bring it to 2021, like those conversations that Daniela just mentioned. So just continue to engage, I would recommend, and that's what I'm most excited about is the engagement level.
It is certainly reaching a new level of participation, which is exciting to be a part of. Rep. Peruso?
Oh, I think I'm really excited about learning. I've been watching this conversation around food sovereignty for a while, but from afar. And I feel like this is the deep immersion experience, and I'm really excited about tackling the farm to school problem because I feel like it's a sticky problem and very challenging. And yeah, game on.
Wonderful. Well, for one, I'm just so excited to be. I feel like there's a wind in the sail. There's a draft just pushing us all forward. And as we continue to chart the course together, it is so exciting to see so many familiar faces and new faces participating in these discussions. So I do hope that this won't be the last year of our Food Systems Brady Bunch or Food Systems Hollywood Squares. Please do continue to participate, engage with all of us over the course of this legislative session. Reach out to food@purplemaya.org, sign up to testify at capital.hawaii.gov, and have a great session and a wonderful 2021. And thank you all so much for being here. Aloha.